Hey Ecofictologists, welcome back to the channel. My name is Lovis and today I am introducing you to a very special guest, Dr. Diogo Verissimo. Hi Diogo, welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Diogo is currently a research fellow at the University of Oxford and is really at the forefront of combining marketing and conservation science. He's the Director for Conservation Marketing and Storytelling for On the Edge Conservation, which aims to champion those species that are really in trouble, really on the edge of extinction. And he is also the Vice President at the International Social Marketing Association, and he's the co-founder of the site Lost and Found, which tells positive, uplifting stories of species brought back from the brink of extinction. So they were thought to be extinct and then were rediscovered. So you have quite the resume there.
That's right.
I first came across your work when I was doing some research on storytelling in conservation, and I stumbled across Lost and Found, and I just had to get in touch. So thank you very much for joining me today.
It's great to be here. Yeah, it's nice to hear that there are more people looking at storytelling and conservation. I think we could use more hands on deck.
Oh, could always use more. At this point, I just kind of would like to hand over to you, and if you could just tell us a bit about how Lost and Found got started and what you wanted to achieve with it.
Yeah, sure. So Lost and Found was really about this notion. You know, as I was a kid, when I was a child, some of the stories that I remember had the most impact on me emotionally was this idea that some animals that were here at some point recently would never be here again. There would be animals that you would never be, no matter how much you look, no one will be able to see again. And so, you know, I had a couple of books about extinct species, and my favorite part was always at the end. They have these sections that they talk about sort of possibly extinct species. You know, they say, oh, no one's seen it for whatever, how many years, but maybe they are still in the peak of the top of this mountain or whatever, right? And I remember, you know, very distinctively sort of always think to myself, oh, I really hope they're still there. I really, you know, maybe they're still around. And this idea of, you know, species that were thought of extinct, in most cases they're not classified officially as extinct because officially you have to wait 50 years. It's a very long process for something to be officially classified as extinct. But often they were thought of as extinct by say experts or government agencies, for example. But then to be found again is this idea that you know, I really found it sort of an emotionally sort of really powerful idea that connected to me a lot. And so I thought, you know, let's tell these stories. And you know, there are quite a few of them, but not just also not just the fact that, okay, a species we thought was gone, now it's back, because a lot of these stories are really about the sort of dedication, the effort, the strength, and the courage and the sort of stubbornness of people who are so incredibly dedicated to these species. We have stories of people who've searched for one creature, you know, to the ends of the earth, of course with no guarantee that it was still there, right? And I think there's something really sort of this sort of you know, dedication. I think it's something that is I think just reading about these stories makes me more optimistic that we can change the fate of a lot of these species that are now on the edge of extinction.
Absolutely, I like that. That it has a nice positive vibe to it.
Yeah. I really feel like these are, yeah, but also I like the fact that it's not only about the species itself, the wildlife itself, right? There's a sort of a human angle, there's a human story. We try very much in our stories in Lost and Found to focus as much on the person rediscovering than on the species being rediscovered, because we do believe that you know, that human side of that story, I think is a sort of a powerful element to get people to connect more. And of course, our goal is to have stories on the website that even people who care nothing about wildlife would enjoy reading, right? And so that was very much the way that we thought about when we were putting the content together.
Yeah, absolutely. Try and reach as many people as possible, right?
Of
And
course, yeah.
what kind of response have you had from those stories? Is there a lot of engagement from visitors to your sites? Did people reach out to
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, we've had some really interesting responses. So let me think what some of the interesting ones were. Um, so we've had um, people who rediscover species write to us and say, "Hey,
Oh,
I've also rediscovered the species. You want to hear my story?" And we've had amazing, really interesting stories. So our website is divided into two parts. Um, one where we basically selected a few, handpicked the most exciting stories, but in essence they are told in a sort of a third person. So it's our voice telling the stories of other rediscoveries, right? Rediscoveries by other people. But then on the blog, we tried a lot to have scientists or researchers or naturalists, the people interested, um, telling the stories of their own rediscoveries of species that they've rediscovered themselves, right? And we've had instances of that. We've had instances of people that we've wrote about writing to us and saying, so for example, recently we've had an instance of um, the person who was behind the rediscovery of the lead-beater's possum wrote to us, and I need to recall his name, which I've shamelessly now forgot. Um,
always on
um,
the spot. It just
yeah, I know
flies
it's
away.
Eric Wilkinson. Um, so he's now in his 80s, and he wrote to us about a number of other things that we should be adding to the story, another number of details we didn't had include, and he was really incredibly um, kind in providing all these other detail that it was difficult for us to obtain without we clearly had not our literature search didn't get all the details, and he so wrote to us and say, hey, what about this detail, that detail. And so of course the content was really enriched by all that detail, and the fact that he was motivated to write to us, I think it was that was really great. I think the other thing that's been really nice is to see yeah, I mean, number of visitors, it's been nice, but I think also the diversity, and sometimes it's really exciting to see that we get visitors from the places where those species are being rediscovered. So for example, we had a story about a species that was rediscovered in St. Helena, so an island in the South Pacific, in the South Atlantic. Um, and the day after we posted that week, we got a number of visitors from St. Helena, which I imagine it was just these small anecdotes sometimes that we get, and it's been a really interesting and sort of rewarding sort of history thus far. That said, I won't sort of sugarcoat it. It is a little bit challenging sometimes to keep these projects going because of course there's not a lot of funding to keep them, and so for example now with COVID, and now I have a one year old at home.
Oh,
We haven't posted anything in the last sort of 6 or 7 months probably. So things has just been it has been a challenge to keep going and keep producing new content and keep moving things forward. But hopefully we can some of that we can resume soon.
so you had funding before, or was this always a
Yeah.
voluntary project?
No. So for me, it was always I always volunteered my time, but we had a little bit of money. We had funding from um, the Society for Conservation Biology, the British Ecological Society, and from the Alongside Wildlife Foundation, small grants which were used to pay for the web designers that designed the website, for some of the writers that wrote stories, and for some other small services, things like that. Um, and so there was a little bit of money involved. We managed to leverage a little bit of funds, but it's not a lot. And so of course there's always we had big dreams about having, for example, animations that would
Mm.
tell the stories, because we have also one thing we've decided from the very beginning was that we had to have a visual representation of the story. So we had a cartoonist
Hmm.
that Amy Gallagher, who's really great, who produced cartoons for every single one of our stories on our homepage. But we at one point we thought, well, what about moving image? Right? Well, how about that? Really short, 30-second animations, one per story, that would allow people to really get the gist of it really, really fast if they prefer that sort of medium. But of course, that costs a lot of money, right?
Sure.
So there's that. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really quite encouraging to hear that organizations like that offer funding for science communication and storytelling in all its different forms. That's really
Indeed.
encouraging, because a lot of the time you do need that little bit of support, that little bit of help to really grow the platform.
Yeah, it makes a big difference, and yeah, definitely. We a big thank you to the organizations that have supported us this far.
Absolutely. I really love that the Lost and Found site has such a positive vibe, and also on your emails, your sign off is it's not all doom and gloom, which I
Yeah,
really like that you have that as your sign off. And you're so right. I think it's good to be reminded of positive stories as well. I mean, we get bombarded with so much negativity all the time. It's really nice to see something dedicated to positive stories. Do you think that's really important as we move forward to change the narrative about climate change and mass extinction from all this depressing, fear-inducing stuff to a more hopeful, motivating message?
yeah. I mean, I think the really key thing we need to bear in mind is that for the average citizen in an urban setting, in Europe, North America, it's actually really easy to ignore, to do nothing about these things. It's easy for me to ignore that climate change is happening. Extinction, most of the times, is happening quite far. I don't have to look at it. It doesn't enter my living room. And so it's really easy for people just if they feel like they're overwhelmed, if they feel like there's nothing they can really contribute, they'll just turn off and continue life, business as usual. So I think there's a real risk that if we fail to communicate in sort of way that can empower people, that we just alienate them, and we'll end up in a situation where we don't have mobile society mobilized in the scale this issue requires, right?
Mm-hmm.
These issues are now at a stage where it cannot just be those people, so the greenies that sort of take up the mantle and take it forward. It needs to be really a majority of people changing how the choices that they make, particularly those in societies where we consume a lot, right? Europe, North America, for example, but also just putting pressure on governments to make the right choices, right? To have the right policies, and that's really the only way we're going to push this forward. But of course, that only happens if people are motivated. If people believe that, yes, they can make a difference, they can influence things, there's still a chance to turn things around, as opposed to if we just convince them that this is all doom and gloom, and there's nothing we can do, and which is, yeah, I think a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. On all your various platforms, and indeed all of the work that you do put an emphasis on storytelling. Is that why you set out to use storytelling as a communication method? Because you think you can reach lots of different kinds of people with it? What do you think it brings to the conversation?
Well, I mean, I think, in a really sort of simplified way, I think it's the ability to get the message to people who naturally wouldn't be interested in it, right? So I think, I can certainly talk about how wonderful, say, the pangolin is, or the rhinoceros is, and a number of people will find that if I just give you some facts about it. Um, uh, there are a number of people who will naturally find that fascinating and engage with it immediately, right? But those are not really the people that we need to motivate and to get to. Those people are they're already part of those that think about sustainability, already think about biodiversity, already think about all of these sustainability challenges. What we need to reach out is for the much larger group of people that if I just give them some facts about pangolins, they'll say, so what? So what? Why is that important? I have so many things to worry in my life. There's my Instagram filters, and there's all these other things I need to worry about. And I need, I don't have a lot of time. I don't need a lot of time to think about the pangolins. Is it endangered? Is it not? Is it important? So I think storytelling is really a way that we can reach a much broader audience than through just throwing information at people, which is often what happens, I feel, when we focus on a lot of facts, a lot of sort of very factual based approach, where we try to, usually we think about it in terms of education, right? And in classrooms, we're given facts to memorize, to remember things about other things. And so I think that storytelling enables us to make things a bit more interesting, a bit more palatable, I think, and exciting for those people that wouldn't naturally care about wildlife, which I think, I think it's also important for us to be upfront and say that that's okay, right? It's okay that there are some people out there have other priorities and care more about other things, and that's okay, right? And that's no, I don't think we need to make sure that everyone in the world is David Attenborough, right? Because that world wouldn't work. The world wouldn't work if everyone had a single priority about one thing. But we do need everyone to make choices in a way that's sustainable, right? And so reaching out to that wider group of people that maybe have diverse interests, but we still need to, at the end of the day, influence the choices they make.
Yeah. Oh, a whole world of David Attenboroughs. I mean, at first when you think about it, you're like, that sounds great, but you're right. We need everybody, to be into their own things and care about their own things, so that, I mean, there are things that I don't want to spend all my time thinking about, so I need somebody else to do it.
Exactly.
But we need to come back from the extreme a little bit. And like I said, Diogo is the director of conservation marketing and storytelling at On the Edge Conservation. And one of your mission statements at On the Edge is that you want to increase conservation attention of these endangered species, these endangered edge species. What does that look like? What does that really mean? Do you want public outcry? Do you want people to put pressure on politicians? What kind of concrete effects are you looking for?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. So edge species are species that are evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered. So in essence, we're looking at species that have very few close relatives, but yet are highly threatened with extinction. So for example, the pangolin is an example, right? So there's really nothing like the pangolin, and yet all those species are threatened with extinction, all 8 species of pangolin. And so we focus on those animals that are really different, that really have nothing else like it or like them, and try to get their conservation outlook improved. Now, that might mean different things for different species. So for some species, it might mean working with on the ground locally to improve, say, for example, reduce habitat loss or reduce persecution of some of these species, for example. It might mean for others working much more globally, thinking about policy, for example, getting, for example, evolutionary distinctiveness recognized in texts like the Convention for Biological Diversity, right, which rules a lot of the policy that is made internationally around biodiversity conservation. So it really matters. It sort of means different things to different species, and of course, we don't. We have to select a few species that we focus on, but and they're all quite different. But the nature of edge species, right? The fact they have very few relatives means that almost by definition, they all will be quite different. So for example, now we focus on species like the kakapo, which is a flightless bird from New Zealand, sort of a ground parrot. Right? We have the ai, who's a species of lemur from Madagascar, who has a really unique sort of look. We have the pangolin that I already mentioned. We have the noombat, right? So it's a sort of looks like I guess sort of a sort of striped bandicoot type like animal, but it's actually really distinct. We have the purple frog in India, right? Which yeah, it's I won't try to describe it. You have to Google it. It's really a unique animal as well. So all of these for all of these animals, we want so slightly different things, but really the key thing is for one people that we want the key audiences to know that these animals exist. We want these people to know that they are threatened, that they're unique, and then we want them to to behave in certain ways, make choices in certain ways that are likely to improve, their outlook. And it really varies. It could be different things for different species. For the Noombat, for example, we're supporting some of these translocations and some reintroductions of individuals to different locations. For the II, for example, we're focusing on reducing persecution, because they're seen as a bad omen in some regions of Madagascar, for example. For the purple frog, most likely we'll be focusing on reducing mortality from a variety of sources. It might be roadkill, for example. And so there's really it's really a very diverse group of species and a very diverse group of threats, really diverse group of target audiences that we work with.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the one solution fits all is almost never the case, is it?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, it is sometimes really tempting to believe that yes, this one thing, if we just do this one thing, it's going to fix it all, but it doesn't quite work like that.
No. What I'm really interested in at the moment is kind of the representation of conservation in fiction, in ecofiction. Kind of telling stories that educate the reader, but also engage the imagination and emotional connection that fiction has. Like before, you said, facts. You can tell somebody a load of facts, but it won't engage them. And I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed John Burns, and he said, giving people facts doesn't do anything. What you have to do is engage the imagination. That's how you change someone's mind. And as a scientist, that's devastating to me because my whole life is about facts. But we have to find a new way of doing it. And a lot of the emphasis in storytelling on conservation issues is nonfiction, because you're telling true stories of real species and often real people, like you say, who are rediscovering species or doing conservation work. But I do think there's a large portion of the public that would more readily pick up a work of fiction rather than a work of nonfiction. Do you think that's true? Do you think fiction can bring something different to the conversation?
So I think we do know a little bit about that. So there's this sort of field of entertainment education, and we've seen entertainment education used mostly for public health, but there's been a little bit of use around environment and biodiversity. So we've seen things like, and I'm not sure if that fits exactly what what you were thinking about, but say for example soap operas, right? It's for example, so we've seen a lot of some storytelling in sort of fictional form take soap operas both in radio and TVs. For example, radio programming is also quite popular in some contexts, and so we've seen some of that. And there's some mixed evidence of success, but I can definitely see how narratives, sort of fictional narratives, could be shaped to be really powerful, because we know that they've been powerful for other things, right? We have evidence, public health to some extent, but other fields as well, where they are able to, for example, shape social norms around an issue. So I don't see why conservation would necessarily be any different. But it's true that we don't have a lot of examples, and certainly we don't have a lot of sort of more research, sort of heavy examples where we are able to very clearly pinpoint what the effects are, what were the outcomes of exposing people to these types of narratives. So I think it's actually, in my sort of my academic hat on, I think of that as an hypothesis. Let's test that. Why not?
Oh yes,
right?
Let's.
It's an experiment. You can have fictional, non-fictional information, expose people to different types of information, see what the outcome is, right? So that seems like an interesting experiment.
Yes, it does. We should definitely do that. And you yourself have written a book. haven't you? 10 Friends to Remember is
Yeah.
an environmental education storybook featuring a young boy's journey through the different issues that impact Sri Lankan wildlife.
Yeah, so that was really at the very one of the very first things that I did. I was my early 20s. I did an internship with this a wonderful Sri Lankan NGO, the Center for Ecosocial Studies. I was looking for different things that I could produce during my time there, and this ended up being one of the outputs. And it's I certainly have come a relatively long way since those days. But it's yeah, I am I am it's a bit of work that it's very dear to me because it was one of the very first examples also of that the illustrator was someone who was local as well, and so that collaboration, that relationship of trying to tell those stories, and again that was a fictional right, completely
Yeah.
fictional work. It's certainly something that I hold very dear, and now it was great that I just able to put it up on Google Books, and see if we can get any more people to use it. Yeah, I mean it was yeah, it's definitely a piece of work that it's very dear to me as one of the very first things that I outputs that I produced as someone who was working in this space of biodiversity conservation.
And you were planning to have it be used in schools? And
Yes. So the rationale for that piece of work was that one of the things that there was a shortage of English language material to be used in a lot of the local schools, and so the idea was that by producing that book as a sort of a free available English reading material to be used in English schools, which took place as a mandatory. And so the idea was that it would then be a useful resource for the schools, but also a way for us to talk about different issues, environmental issues, human-wildlife conflict, a couple of different issues that relates to that particular area's conservation, to be honest. So in this case, we were based in Sigiriya, so it's in sort of the middle of the country, more or less. And that was the idea. I believe there was a print run that was produced, but then of course the easiest way to disseminate things these days is digitally, and so I thought the best way really is to put it online so that whoever is interested in it can just download it and use it.
And in the foreword of the book, you talk about the importance of environmental education, how mainstreaming it is the key to making a difference in the areas of conservation. How big an impact do you think storytelling could have in this aspect? Do you think fictional storytelling could have the same aspect as non-fictional storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I'll take it from the beginning, and I'll say that I think it's really important that we realize that at the end of the day, conservation is about people, right? Sometimes it's really tempting to think that conserving elephants is about elephants, but it really isn't. It's about people, right? So elephants, rhinos, jaguars, tigers, pangolins, whatever it is that we're hoping to keep around for a little bit longer, whatever they do stay around or not will depend solely basically on the decisions people make, right? There's and that those might be relatively simple decisions, what products you buy, if you buy more or less of a product. It might be other types of more political decisions, broader spectrum ones. And so it is really key that we think about conserving biodiversity, less about sort of sometimes I feel we focus a lot on describing declines. So there were 10 of this species, now there's 5 of these species, now there's 3 of these species, which of course is important, but I think it's really important that we focus on the root of whatever threats a species is facing, and that is inevitably going to be human behavior, some level of decision making. Now directly to your question, I do think that it would be great for. I think we need to explore tools, the diversity of tools, and I think maybe not maybe. I think it's probably. I think it's a really good argument to be made that fictional storytelling has not had a lot of use, and I think maybe we could explore that more and see what are the contexts in which it can be best used to leverage more response and trigger more sustainable behavior. So I think that would be a great thing, and I think we do need to realize again, because one size not fit all. There will be contexts where this type of narrative will be the most promising, right? The best tool that we can use, and it's just a matter of us knowing what that context is, what the audiences are that respond better to this type of messaging, right? But of course, I think we only have to look at things like the Avengers, right, to see that fictional content is hugely appealing to many people, right? Many people. And so why not? Why shouldn't we be thinking about those audiences as well?
Absolutely. I love the quote from the foreword: stories are a perfect way to reach a young child's attention as they mix real issues and a fantasy world where everything is possible and imagination is the only limit. I love that.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I will say this. I mean, at that time, I was certainly focused a lot on younger audiences, because that was where I started, professionally. But since then, I've started to also, realize that there's really no reason why we shouldn't also think about more sort of older audiences and influencing those older sort of audience groups as well. Because of course, children, they're wonderful, but also they're not decision makers in most
No.
of the context, right? Yes, they can influence their parents, their family members in some way, but ultimately they're not in a lot of instances the decision makers, right? So if we unless we look playing the long game, in 20 years time what's going to happen, which the reality is just in many instances we don't have 20 years to wait.
No.
Right. And so I will that's a I think it's also good to bear that in mind.
Absolutely. But these kinds of stories, like you wrote your book for children, right? Like you say, you were focusing on younger
Mhm.
audiences. But do you think maybe the fictional stories resonate with children better than they do adults, or do you think adults also take in fictional
Hmm.
narratives the same?
I mean, I'm pretty convinced that there's no difference, and this is not based. It's just based on intuition on my side. I'll admit. But if you think about some of the big, sort of really big, really popular narratives, right? Harry Potter, right? How that's. I mean, I certainly have plenty of adult friends who have read all Harry Potter books. Right, so it certainly resonates with younger audiences, but also older people. So I think there's certainly a scope to have these. Also, because I guess the the beauty of fictional narratives is that they're not sort of weighted. They're not weighted down by reality, right? What actually happened, right? Anything can happen, and so because of that, there's so much flexibility that you can weave a narrative in a way that is perfectly it fits perfectly with, say, the way that a particular group sees the world, or the way that a particular world um, you know likes to have information presented to them, put it that way. So I think that's from a purely sort of conceptual way, it seems to me that the possibilities are really endless almost there.
Have you seen, did the schools where you were working in Sri Lanka use the book?
So this is, of course, one of the challenges of short-term projects. My understanding is that it was distributed, um, but after that, I'm not. I will have to admit that I'm not sure the extent to which it was used. I don't know. My understanding is that there was a print run, and that it was distributed, but the extent to which it was used, I don't know. Which of course I should have engaged further. Yeah.
Oh, well, who knows? Maybe they're still using it. Maybe it's
Well,
educating children all over Sri Lanka.
well, I mean, to be honest, in a very sort of, with all honesty, at this point, even if there's one person who has read it, I think it would be worth it at this point. And so, I'd be very happy that I put in that small amount of time.
I guess I would also like to know whether you read or have read any fiction that resonates with you in a ecological or conservation way, that portrays it in a way that you think is inspiring
It's
or
a good
effective.
question. It's a good question. Let me think. So I will admit that a lot of what I read is more technical in nature. Well, I mean, of course, as you say, a lot of the storytelling in the environmental space is they focus around documentaries,
Hmm.
focus around those types, that sort of genre, and so it doesn't. There's not a lot of that fictional thing. I'll try to dodge your question slightly, and I will give you something slightly in the neighborhood of what you asked, which is maybe the fictional piece of it's not a book, um, but which was I think pretty influential when I was a kid, which was Captain Planet.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I don't know if you've come across Captain Planet.
I haven't. No.
Captain Planet is the hero. Is going to bring pollution down to zero.
Oh.
Yeah, no, it's pretty exciting. Yeah, I mean, it was a sort of a 1990s cartoon. And it was I think one of the very first sort of mainstream cartoons that's really focused on the environment as an issue. It sort of focused the traditional things, your um, uh, a sustainable harvest of natural resources, pollution, those types of things. And of course, he had a hero, right? Captain Planet, of course. Um, and basically a group of teenagers around him who were the Planeteers, of course, because Captain Planet has to have Planeteers,
Of course.
obviously. Um, and so I thought it was in terms of fiction that's geared at environment, I think that might be, at least for that sort of, people were children at that, around that decade of the 90s. It was really a thing that people remember. It was a very big it was a very big success. And I think, yeah, as I'm saying, it must be one of the very first examples of sort of a big mainstream cartoon, whose main and only topic really was the environment, right? Environmental conservation, which is, yeah, was a really, at the time I thought it was quite an exciting thing.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna look up Captain Planet now.
Yeah.
Sounds
Oh yeah.
great.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm waiting for the Netflix remake of Captain
Oh,
Planet
yes.
anxiously.
That would be
Yeah.
great.
Mm,
That would be great.
absolutely.
Well, I mean, I will, of course, be linking to putting lots of links down in the description below so people can find Lost and Found and On
Thanks.
the Edge Conservation, obviously, as well as your own video, as well as your own website. But are there any other
Thanks.
resources that you can think of that would be useful for
Yeah,
viewers?
actually, there's one. There's a really exciting community, conservation optimism. So this is this movement of people who think about conservation messaging in an optimistic sort of motivational frame, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that's really something that's worth visiting as well. Conservation optimism is basically a coalition of multiple organizations and small um, I guess individuals as well. So Lost and Found is one of the members, and I think that's also would be worth people having a look. I mean, they're really quite. They have a podcast. There's really a quite active community, and there's lots of really exciting content there as well. So I think that would be worth having a look as well.
Excellent. I will link to that in the description below as well then.
Great.
Um, well, that about wraps us up, really. So all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for taking the time to
Absolutely.
come on the channel, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. And
Same.
hopefully anybody who has any questions, I can just relay them and
Feel free.
Send them to you. That would be great.
Cheers.
Yeah, well, that's all from me today then. So I will see you next week, ecofictologists.
See you all. Bye bye.